Thank you. So the program today is Legalized Pot, a debate on Proposition 4. On the pro side, we have Jim Borghesani and Richard Elrick. On the con side, we have Vinnie DiMacedo, Senator, and Mike O'Keefe, DA. We're going to start with the pro side pursuant to the program. If Jim, Richard, if you're ready, come on up. For the sandwich cable, which we appreciate taping the show so that we can get this to all of the members who were not able to attend. If you could just please make sure you use the mic, and if there's a question, if you could just repeat the question. And I don't know how you want to split it, if you want to tag team it, 5 minutes each, because there'll be a lot of back and forth with questions going forward.
Can you sort of give us notice when 5 minutes are up?
I sure will. Absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you, and thanks for having us in. Thank you, Susan, for setting this up, and thank all of you for coming. My name is Jim Borghesani. I'm the Director of Communications for Yes on Question 4. We're starting this campaign with the basic starting point that it's not a question, marijuana, yes or no. It's a question of how do we want to control the marijuana market that already exists in Massachusetts. One of the things the Senate report got right, which wasn't many things, but one of the things they got right was that there are 880,000 active marijuana users in Massachusetts. It's already in our state. It's been a thriving market for decades. We've tried prohibition. Prohibition has failed. Prohibition has not prohibited marijuana. It just hasn't. What it has prohibited is the ability for us to take a regulated, safe approach to how the marijuana market should be structured. Right now, it's dominated by criminals, by drug dealers, other than the medical marijuana market, obviously, which is having a lot of trouble getting set up. But I'm talking about the adult use marijuana market. Some people call it recreational. I never use that term. I'm a light drinker of alcohol. I guess it's called a social drinker. I've never referred to myself as a recreational drinker. I think reporters, and I used to be a reporter, sometimes they use shorthand, so recreational marijuana has become the term. I frankly don't like it. There are some people who use marijuana because they like it. I'm not one of them. But anyway, that's just the thing of recreational. But that's what we see. We see recreational marijuana use to distinguish it from medical. So our approach is this. We recognize that the marijuana market exists. It's dominated by criminals and drug dealers. Every transaction now, even though it's decriminalized, every single transaction is a criminal transaction. If question 4 fails, we have the same market. Just as much marijuana in the market, it will still be sold by criminals and drug dealers. Don't think that by voting against question 4, you're somehow keeping marijuana out of the market. That's just not the reality. It's in the market. It's been in the market for decades. It will stay in the market. What we're saying is this. Let's take a regulated approach. Let's set up a structure, just like the Alcoholic Beverages Control Commission, that regulates the market. Our proposition would create a Cannabis Control Commission, a 3-member commission, just like the ABCC, that would be report to the treasurer and be appointed by the treasurer, and they would set the regulations for the industry. Now, our opponents will say that this is a business-driven industry, by the industry, for the industry. If we were going to write a initiative that would benefit industry, we would be telling the regulators what to do. We're not. We give these regulators total authority over any product that's sold. The industry won't determine what's sold. The regulators will. How it's packaged, how it's labeled, whether people can advertise, where they can advertise, if they can advertise at all, who can apply for a license, what will the license application be like, how much capital do they have to show that they have. We start for the first year by starting with businesses that are already approved by the Department of Public Health. They're already on the list. We're not bringing in businesses on our own. For
Mr.
the-
Brooks,
Yes,
I'd like to hear from Mr. Elrick as well.
okay.
Just if you could.
Yes, can I just
Thank
finish?
you.
Because, can I finish my,
You-
so
you
we
A
have,
couple seconds.
again, we set up a regulated structure. We base it on the same regulations, that same structure that regulates banking in Massachusetts or the construction industry. It's a regulated approach. With this approach, buyers of marijuana will now know what they're buying, what's in it, who grew it. Right now, they don't. We send any buyer of marijuana to a criminal, a drug dealer. They don't know what they're buying. They don't know what's in it. They don't know who grew it. They don't know who has touched it. They don't know who transported it. We want to be able to give people, again, these 880,000 users who will be here 5 years from now, no matter what happens with question 4, we want to put them into a market that they know what they're getting, that's regulated, a market that is, the commerce is conducted by businesses who are regulated, who pay taxes, and who answer to the Cannabis Control Commission in a transparent setting. All the Cannabis Control Commission meetings will be open to the public. So every regulation that takes place, anybody can go and give recommendations. So we think that this is a far better approach than the system that exists today, that has failed at every level. And I'll be glad to talk more about this and to give you, and plus local control, by the way. I hope we get into this because there's significant local control.
We will, there'll be a lot of questions for you right after.
Okay.
We just want to give Mr. Elrick a chance, but most of this will be questions.
Good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Richard Elrick, and I do want to give you just a moment or a bit of background because I think it helps to hear the perspective and to know where someone's coming from when they talk about these issues. I'm a former 3-term Barnstable Town Councilor. I have worked 35 years as a Nantucket Sound ferryboat captain, member of the Massachusetts Bar, though I haven't practiced law in a decade or so. But more importantly for this discussion, I'm a father and a grandfather, and I think that to me is key. I did want to quickly mention what the current status of marijuana use is in this country and in this state. Product's been cultivated, evidence is very clear on this, for more than 5,000 years. It's been around. People have been using it for that period of time. Approximately 100 million Americans have used marijuana over the course of the last 40 or 50 years. 25 million acknowledge having used it last year. And about 7% of the population uses it on a regular basis now. And as Jim mentioned, about $800,000 use it in Massachusetts. Across the country and across the world, people are reassessing how to best handle marijuana. And as we're seeing in different states, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, voters are deciding that there's a better way, and so they're moving towards a regimen of legalization as opposed to prohibition. I did want to also very quickly mention the history of prohibition because I think it's insightful, and it shows quite clearly that the arguments have almost always and invariably been based not on science and not on the facts, but on politics and, in fact, on prejudice. Marijuana was first made illegal in 1937, and the director of the war on drugs at that time was a gentleman by the name of Henry Anslinger. And I want to read just a couple of quotes because they're indicative of the mindset of the beginning of marijuana prohibition. And these are his quotes. The primary reason to outlaw marijuana is its effect on the degenerative races. Marijuana leads to pacifism and communism brainwashing. There are 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the U.S., and most of them are Negroes. That's the flavor of the mindset of the people who started the war on marijuana. More recently, the war was intensified in the late 1960s, 1970s under the administration of Richard Nixon. John Ehrlichman, who was one of his chief aides, left a quote in a book that was recently written that I think really describes the more recent analysis of folks who have been pushing the drug war. And he said, quote, "The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or blacks. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about drugs? Of course we did." end quote. That tells you a little bit about how this war began and how, to such a large degree, it wasn't based on the science and based on the facts. Very quickly to the facts, the Center for Disease Control last year, its statistics showed about 400,000 people died from use of tobacco. About 30 to 50,000 died from the abuse of alcohol. About 30,000 died from the use of legal prescription drugs, and not a single recorded case of death by overdose of marijuana. So I'll leave you with that. We want to have time for questions. But from every perspective, it's about politics. It's about ideology. It's about prejudice. And I'm not suggesting the opponents to this ballot question are prejudiced, but I am suggesting that the history of this movement is clearly based on that. It's time to end prohibition, stop the drug war. Let's call a truce. Let's focus on treatment, education, and not arresting people and incarcerating people. It's not been good for the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, gentlemen.
So
if
we
you
take
would
questions or
just
we
take
sit?
a seat for a sec.
Sure.
We'll have the other side, and then we'll all come up for questions. Thank you. Next, if Senator DiBattista and Mr. O'Keefe, you can sit there or switch off, whatever's comfortable.
I like to have the district attorney next to me.
All
Just to
right?
protect myself there, so I would defer to the district. You want me to go first? Thank you so much for having us. I appreciate the opportunity to have this debate because this is a big issue. This is, whether you like it or not, the reality is the people of the Commonwealth are going to vote. And I want you all to have both sides of this debate. And as the people that just came up before me, I have a great deal of respect for them. They have every right to have a ballot question. But I think we have every right to share what our concerns are, and that's why we're here to talk about this and give you our perspective and why we think clearly this moves way too fast. Just because Colorado and Washington State have done it doesn't mean that we on the East Coast have to follow suit, especially since we have not had the opportunity to really see any long-term effects of what this means to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Because once you open this door, you will never close it. And so they talk about how this is fair, but let me just explain to you, in Colorado, it's working well. In Colorado, 25% excise tax, right? 25% is the excise tax. In Washington State, 37% excise tax. Does anybody here know what the excise tax is going to be on this ballot question for the town of, for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts? 3.75% excise tax. So let me just do a quick little bit of math for you there. This is going to be legal, 3.75% excise tax. They suggest that within 2 years it'll be $1 billion industry. As a matter of fact, in Colorado, there are now more pot shops in Colorado, and only a third of the state, because not the entire state has legalized it, because some have said that they didn't want it. There are more pot shops than there are McDonald's and Starbucks combined. That's how quickly the industry has grown. And so with that being said, so the money, $1 billion industry, $37.5 million. Well, the first year you make no money because you have to do all the regulations, because there's no federal support, there's no, there's no, the FDA, the EPA, none of them, they have nothing to do with this because it's still illegal at the federal level. So that means the Commonwealth has to do everything itself. We have to create our own EPA. We have to create our own FDA to make sure that these products are safe. Guess what? You're growing these products. You're growing them, and people are going to consume them. They're going to consume them, and they got, on the market, 50% of the products are edibles. 50% are candies, cookies, gummy bears, butter, lip balm, you name it, they infuse it. And so that's a reality that you're going to be facing. The Commonwealth has all that responsibility. So the first year, no money. Second year, about $500 million industry, and then it'll be up to full-fledged industry. So I looked at, well, what's Colorado spending to regulate this industry? I read and I saw that the Governor Hickenlooper just put in his 2015 budget, not the 2016 because I haven't seen that one, that they have spent $45.6 million regulating the industry. So if that's correct, that means that the best case scenario is we're going to be losing $10 million a year, and then the first years going up to it, we're going to lose all of the 40 some odd million dollars the first year, half the second year, and lose 10 million the other year. So this is not a revenue generator by any means. And that is why I believe 120 legislators have come out in opposition to this, 10 in support of this. Well, every single district attorney, every single sheriff, most every medical group out there has come out in opposition to this because they've studied this and they've looked at this and there's concern. The Mass Municipal Association has come out in opposition to this. Superintendents of schools have come out in opposition to this. The devil is in the details. I understand, and I certainly hope, and I'm sure it's not the case with Mr. Ehrlich, that he's suggesting that somehow we are racist and that we want in some way to go after people to keep them down. By no means is that all. But I am very concerned about a lot of different issues, and I know that the district attorney is going to talk from his public safety background and understanding a little bit more about exactly what we think is going to happen and what our concerns are happening. And this is why we believe, despite all this, there's a 24-page piece of legislation that people are going to be voting for, and they're hoping that the question is marijuana, yes or no. It's a lot more. There's a lot more devils in the details. And so now I'm going to turn this over to the District Attorney of Barnstable County, my good friend Michael O'Keefe.
Who's getting 30 seconds from you?
Oh, geez, I'm sorry.
Wow.
Very sorry.
These words?
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. And, this is an issue that we feel is very important. And you should feel it's important, too, because, as has been mentioned already, once we go down this road, there's no going back. And so it ought to give us pause to really investigate what will happen to Massachusetts and what's the best indicator, what's already happened in places like Washington and Colorado. So, there's a lot of information out there, and I would just commend you to investigate the information that's out there, and don't just take our word for it or Mr. Ehrlich's or Mr. Borgesani's. You can access a great deal of information at a website, safeandhealthymass.com. That's safeandhealthymass.com. You can readily see that there is a significant amount of science that is very concerned about this. The healthcare industry, the Mass Hospital Association, the Mass Medical Society, the Association for Behavioral Health Care, the National Association of Mental Illness of Massachusetts, the Conference of Boston Teaching Hospitals, Associated Industries of Massachusetts, the Retailers Association of Massachusetts, the Construction Industries of Massachusetts, educators and community leaders, the Mass Municipal Association, as has been mentioned, the school superintendents. It just goes on and on and on of the entities that have investigated and looked at what's happened in other parts of the country are all in opposition to this ballot question. Now, you may be somewhat ambivalent about the issue of, well, there's a certain appeal to the notion that, prohibition hasn't worked, so let's look at it at an alternative. This is not the alternative. And if you really drill down on it, you will understand that, I think. And Governor Charlie Baker, Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito, Democratic Boston Mayor Marty Walsh, Democratic Speaker Robert DeLeo, Democratic Attorney General, and as has been mentioned, 129 state reps and senators from across the Commonwealth, all against this bill. Marijuana is already decriminalized in Massachusetts. It was done by ballot question in '08. And there isn't a single person in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts who goes to jail for the simple possession of marijuana. Not one. Not one. So when you hear this siren song that, we have to pass this because these poor people are being put into jail, that is simply not true. Not one. Not one. Now, some people have gone to prison with a conviction of possession of marijuana because it accompanied a home invasion, carrying a gun, or some other crime. But simple possession of marijuana, nobody goes to jail. Medical marijuana, ladies and gentlemen, is now available in Massachusetts for those people who have a belief contrary to medical science, that this is some kind of a medical tool. We passed that. It's available. And interestingly, it was another ballot question that gave us medical marijuana. And the statute enumerated 7 or 8 conditions: glaucoma, cancer, diabetes, several other medical conditions, and then said at the bottom, the residual clause, or other. Now, of the 25,000 or so, roughly, medical marijuana cards that have been issued in Massachusetts, 90+% of them are for those people that are suffering from other. This is, the, if you will, stalking horse for the ultimate legalization of recreational marijuana, which is what this ballot question seeks, and allows for those entities that are selling medical marijuana to automatically be enabled to sell recreational marijuana.
We're rounding up.
Okay. So I think
Public
we'll,
safety thing on the driving.
Washington State, Colorado now, the increase in, and first let me say that police don't have a tool, as they do, for driving under the influence of alcohol to measure your BAC, if you will. Where it shows up is on the autopsy table. And in Colorado and in Washington, deaths have increased 60+% motor vehicle homicide by people under the influence of cannabis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. If you want to just come up, gentlemen.
I will sit on the side.
Sure. Or either side. Appreciate your time. Important topic. That was very even. Great job, speakers, and in terms of different topics. So, first question, I'm going to repeat the question for the cable.
More an observation than a question. The side that's opposed to this suggested that if this were enacted, that it would be here forever. I would cite the 18th Amendment and the 21st Amendment of the United States Constitution to say that just because it becomes doesn't mean it can't be undone. There's nothing more difficult on earth than passing a constitutional amendment and then repealing that same constitutional amendment. So I think that that's disinformational. On the other side of things, I would ask to have people reflect on legalization of gambling and the argument that was made for so very many years against legalized gambling and the potential criminal problems that we would all be facing. We ultimately wound up with lotteries everywhere, and state-approved gambling is now in suburban Boston. Connecticut has it. How long before every other state has it? It's a rationalization and a recognition of the fact that some things you cannot prohibit people from doing because they will do it. The issue becomes complicated when you say, how do we effectively regulate it? How do we effectively make sure that something that is going to be done and will be done is properly managed? And I think fundamentally, that is a question we're going to get to. And I think that's the important thing that I take away from today's discussion.
Okay, I'm going to take that as a question. Whoever wants to jump in, one from each side maybe. How do we deal with this regulated on the local level?
First, I just want to correct two things. The senator said that there's a 27% excise tax in Colorado. That's not true.
25%, they said.
25%. That's also not true. The excise tax in Colorado is 10%. The total taxes are 25%. The excise
What is
tax,
the second 15% tax? What's that called?
that's a special sales tax. The
For- on
excise
what? On
tax,
what?
the total tax is 25%. There's a 10% excise tax.
Okay, 10%, 15% medical tax on
25
marijuana, which is 25%.
25%. The excise tax is 10%. You mentioned our excise tax of 3.75%. That's correct. There's also the sales tax of 6.25%. There's also the local option tax of 2%. So the total taxes could be 12%. And the Marijuana Enforcement Division in Colorado, the budget last year was $10 million. Now, there were some optional education programs the governor asked for that was funded from the marijuana fund. Those were educational programs. A lot of those were one-time for materials. So it's just not true that administration costs $45 million. The budget for the Marijuana Enforcement Division in Colorado, which, by the way, also oversees the medical marijuana industry, was $10 million. Now, local control. All local officials, selectmen, whatever is your ultimate town authority, mayor, selectmen, would have the ability to cap marijuana establishments at 20% of the existing liquor licenses. So, for example, I live in Duxbury. I don't even know how many liquor stores we have. Hypothetically, say we have 10 liquor package stores, liquor retail licenses. Selectmen in Duxbury could say we want no more than 2 marijuana establishments. They can cap it at 20%. By a ballot vote, which is similar to 2.5 override, other ways you can get on the ballot, a ballot vote, the people could eliminate, prohibit marijuana establishments entirely by a ballot vote. And we structured that the same way, a 2.5 override. Basically, you'd have to have, I think, 10% of the people who voted in the last state election. So that local authority exists. Local authorities will determine where the establishments can be, when they can operate, the lighting, the security measures, the signage. You would have control over that. One more thing, establishments would not automatically be allowed to sell marijuana. They would be allowed to apply for a license to sell marijuana. It would not be automatic, as the district attorney said.
Okay, and the other side. Thank you.
Yeah, this ballot question sets no limits on the potency of this product. You know, when I was a kid, the stuff that grew out of the ground and the Massachusetts statute that deals with marijuana currently, 2.5% THC content. That's what marijuana is legally in Massachusetts under the statute. Today, it's about 18% THC. And that's why the Netherlands, of all places, the first great experimenter in this area, is now moving to take every marijuana entity that's over 15% THC and classify it as a hard drug, like heroin. This ballot question specifically authorizes edibles, products like candy bars, gummy bears, cannabis, cola, oils, concentrates, severely limits municipalities and the state's ability to limit the nature and presence of the marijuana industry in their communities, bars communities from restricting home grows. So every person who's over 21 can grow 12 marijuana plants in their house worth about $5,000 each. Do you think that's going to eliminate the black market? In Colorado, in Pueblo, the sheriffs of these counties, which are now trying to roll this back, because people are moving in, Cuban cartels, Russian cartels, growing this stuff and shipping it out of state. Do we want those problems in Massachusetts? I hope not.
And I just want to close on this one point. You mentioned this. I have the governor's message here of total spending, literally line by line item here. So when he tells you $10 million, I just look for yourself, governor's message, Governor Hickenlooper, 2015, what we are spending on marijuana to go through, $44.8 million, and I can go through the list for you. So I'm not misguiding you on that. And it is 3.75% excise in the Massachusetts. I didn't mention sales tax because there's also sales tax in Colorado. I didn't mention that. Everyone pays sales tax. I don't care. We all have businesses. You pay sales tax. So I didn't mention the sales tax because they charge sales tax there. And I'm not sure in regards to Washington State, but I know in Massachusetts everything has sales tax. You buy a car, you pay sales tax. You buy any product, you pay sales tax. That doesn't get included in the
Vinny, you said there was an excise tax of 27%. You compared it to us of 3.25%. 3.75. All I'm saying is that you're apples and oranges. The total tax in Colorado is 25%. Total tax.
No
Not
sales, no
excise
sales tax, they don't tax on
The
site,
total tax in Colorado is 25%, Ben.
and 2.9% sales tax.
The
in
total
Colorado.
tax is 27.9%, 25% special sales tax, 10%, it's the total tax, Ben.
That's fine. And so
That's
so
total
that's it.
tax, so you can't
Total
compare.
tax is 27.9%.
So yes, our taxes, by the way, the reason why we
Thank
set ours
you.
at 12%, we want to help eliminate the illicit market, by the way.
Thank you. Okay, so Mr. Ehrlich is going to start with the next question, if that's all right with you?
Sure.
And Don?
I was just wondering, does either side have any poll numbers on the probability of this passing or failing?
Actually, the polls have sort of been all over the place. They're very close at this point. They were much higher in favor of passage 6 months ago. But I will offer an example of one of the concerns and one of the reasons that's been raised for why that polling might have become more close recently. And it's the issue of the opioid crisis, so-called opioid crisis that we are experiencing. And we've heard some of the drug warriors say, oh my goodness, if we legalize another drug, it's just going to compound the issue. Well, I want to tell you a personal anecdote. I had a very close family member who suffered from substance abuse much of his adult life, was an alcoholic for many years, tried to get off alcohol, as a result used a drug called Suboxone. And the only thing that allowed him to survive was the use of marijuana. It's what allowed him to exit the use of harder drugs. And that's true across the boards. When you look at all of the studies, the credible studies that have been done on this, you see that rather than being a gateway drug, marijuana is a drug that allows people to avoid and get away from the use of the harder drugs. So the answer to your question, polling's close. It's very close. And partly because of the exaggeration and the fear-mongering that the opponents have undertaken recently.
Let me just go ahead and
Follow up.
to that. Then you're probably gonna be all set, I hate to say it, because we just had a conversation at this table beforehand. My colleague from the Board of Selectmen and Bourne was running for state rep. He said people went to him and said, oh, I can't vote for you, I'm voting for such and such. Totally different race. The public is so uninformed. It's incredible. So that's,
So the point was made that the public needs more information on this issue, and that's one of the reasons for this forum. Ron, question?
Yeah, I have to disagree with something one of the proponents said. They said this isn't about an industry. Everything in this country is about it. When you talk about millions and millions of dollars, it's about an industry. It may be about helping somebody who's got glaucoma, but basically, this is about the money. I don't want to be rude, but it's about the money. Now, the suggestion is that this is an illegal market, and if we make it legal, that will go away. Well, as District Attorney O'Keefe said, if I'm a liquor distributor, I have to deal with Dewar's, and I have to deal with Jack Daniels, and I have to deal with Budweiser. If I'm a cigarette distributor, I have to deal with Philip Morris. If I'm a marijuana distributor, I can grow it in my backyard. I can grow it in Florida. Now, Rick has shaken his head, but the industry is not going to want competition. The industry is not going to want me growing the stuff in my backyard and undercutting them. They're going to lean on the district attorneys to go out and make sure that their industry is protected. And that's going to be expensive. So they're going to go into, make sure that the stuff isn't coming from Florida, and I'm not growing it in my backyard, and I'm not an illegal distributor, selling it without a tax. I mean, it's a very many-headed hydra, and it's far more complicated. And the other thing I have to say is, I'm against gambling, so you see how far in the tank I am. I think that these things hurt the poorer people in the country.
Right.
I mean, I see people sitting at the lighthouse in Chatham, fishermen I know, they used to be looking at the birds, now they're scratching tickets, I mean, it falls on people who can't afford it. And I just think that, and the other thing is, I don't want to ramble on, but a lot of people do this because it's illegal. Kids do it because it's illegal. Right? If you make it legal, they'll just go on to something else that's illegal because they feel, they're doing something in secret, so that's my little.
Thank you. So the point was made, it's really about money, and after Mr. O'Keefe, I'll take questions from Susan next after a comment by Mr. O'Keefe.
Thank you. First of all, I agree with virtually everything you said. But, I just want to, this idea that we're going to eliminate the black market and that this is somehow good and it's going to help people get off hard drugs, are you kidding me? if you talk to anybody in behavioral health who runs the Ray Tomasis, who run Gosnell, any of the hospitals in Boston who deal with the addiction problem, you'll find they will tell you that every single heroin addict that they encounter started smoking marijuana. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody who smokes marijuana is going to become a heroin addict, but every single heroin addict started smoking marijuana. So, for me as a district attorney and for my colleagues across the state, this isn't about whether some 30-year-old guy who's an engineer at Wang out on 128 and lives in a beautiful house in Wayland can go home at the end of the day and smoke a joint. I could care less. But are we going to give the imprimatur of the adult community to say to kids, this substance is okay, this is harmless, when the medical evidence, the brain science tells us even the casual use of marijuana permanently alters the physiology of the brain, of the developing brain of kids? So, Yale did a tremendous study, Yale Medical School, not exactly a conservative place. And they published it in 2014 in the Journal of Adolescent Medicine, and they made the connection between marijuana and opiates. And what they found in their study was kids who started smoking dope when they were 13, 14, 15, and then went on to terrific careers, stopped smoking dope, became very successful adults. They then had an injury. They fell off the turnip truck. They were prescribed an opiate. If they had smoked dope when they were kids, 2.5 times less likely to be able to get off of the opiate, because the receptors in the brain that THC attach to are the same receptors that opiates attach to. That's Yale Medical School. So there's a lot of sophistry out there around this issue. Do your own research, folks, and then, like all of these other entities, I think you're going to come to one conclusion.
Thank you. I'll take a question from Susan,
Yeah.
and then,
Again, it's more of a comment. I think it's disingenuous to compare the medical marijuana industry with the recreational marijuana industry, because medical marijuana the medical effects for people who need medical marijuana is from smoking marijuana. We are talking about an industry now that has edibles available to children, very high doses of the component. The effects of the passage of the legislation in Colorado and Washington and so on, especially Colorado, has resulted in an enormous increase in calls to poison control centers because of children having access to edible marijuanas as opposed to the medical marijuana, which is controlled and again, not effective edible. It's only effective if you smoke it on physiological conditions. So I guess aside from the local control, which I still have some very large concerns over, I wonder why you're sort of comparing it to the medical marijuana industry, and why the legislation would allow people who are doing medical marijuana to then switch over and be able to supply other types of marijuana.
so the question asks for some more discussion about the disparity between medical marijuana and recreational.
Yeah, I don't recall comparing medical to recreational, but I will say this. The Journal of the American Medical Association has shown that in states that have a robust medical marijuana system, opioid addiction has reduced and mortality has reduced by 25%. Now, about your comment with the edibles and the poison center. Last year, the poison center, yes, the calls have increased the poison centers. They went from 44 in 2013 to 132 last year. That's a big increase. Look at the amount of calls about children who ingested vitamins in Colorado. more than 2,000. There were more calls, there were far more calls about people who ingested, kids who ingested common household cleaning supplies. It's an extremely small amount, yes, a large percentage increase. And by the way, those poison calls, if you look at the kids who were actually treated, it went from 7 to 16. Now, yes, that's a big percentage increase. Unfortunately, those kids, yes, there was an increase. That's why Colorado has banned anything that looks like an animal. No more gummy bears, no more Swedish fish. It's
Your
prohibited now.
legislation doesn't do that.
Our legislation is going to start from the reality in Colorado. The regulators that we are giving total authority to, by the way, in Massachusetts, there's already a law, a regulation that says no candy, no marijuana infused candy that or a product that resembles commercial candy can be sold. That exists under DPH regulations. Our regulators, the people who are on the commission, we think will look at that and say, well, that's our starting point. Let's look at the other states that have gone before us. Let's look at Colorado and Washington, which no longer allow candy of any kind.
Thank you, great point. Let's move on, we're short of time here.
And I apologize because I have to leave. I have to be at catch a ferry in Portland, Maine at 12:15. So I apologize. I have to leave. But I know that my good friend will do a great job of taking care of us. But I just want to make this. You hit this point. It's like we talk about the edibles. 50% of the industry is edibles. That's where this is an industry. This is all about money. There is big money in this, and there is a reason that they wanted to open the doors. And so to suggest that they're not doing this in Colorado, the industry immediately went there, and they will continue to fight. And trust me, let's face it, when your industry has become very successful and is making a lot of money, they will then work to make sure that these laws favor themselves and their industry. And it is, I believe, that suggests even if they change it now, over a period of time, the hope is because it's all about making money. And I don't mean, listen, they have every right to put this on the ballot and make the case. But in fairness, we have every right to say these are our legitimate concerns. And so when you talk about that increase in public safety, about the accident increase from 8% to 16% in the Washington state of fatal accidents, people who have died, that's 45 people to 106 people. That's not a huge amount, 45, 106 people. But every single one of those people that died in those car accidents, those are real people. Those are brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers of somebody. So maybe the number's not big, but the implications are big. And so when we talk about poison control, I have seen just in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the past 2 or 3 months, 3 cases where we've heard about people who have ingested marijuana-laced candies and have had to be sent to the hospital. And it's not even legal now. So the reality is if you think it's not going to happen more when there are more pot shops than there are Starbucks and McDonald's combined, I just say, I disagree. I totally disagree. When you open this up on a commercial market, you're going to have people competing one another saying, my product's better, come to mine, I'm going to give you off, just like the cigarette industry when they went in and they were giving cigarettes away, and of course eventually we went back at them, but they want to sell their products more, and that's just a reality. You're going to compete, and they want to get more and more of this drug in their hands. So with that, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Please forgive me for having to leave early.
Thank you, Senator.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Very grateful.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Just a couple of quick closing comments, because I think we've heard a lot of information today, a lot of it, unfortunately, not particularly accurate. First of all, I just want to do a quick survey. How many people here, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but how many people here occasionally like to have a glass of wine with dinner? And occasionally. So that gives me a sort of so that gives me a little bit of information as I make my following comments. Has anybody, and I guess some of you have been in a package store recently, have you seen how many flavored drinks there are? Have you seen what a package store looks like today? So yes, there is the potential, certainly, that marijuana can be infused in a variety of different products, just like alcohol can be infused into a variety of different products. The issue is, how do you regulate it, how do you control it, how do you keep it safe for kids? Access for children. Access for children is guaranteed right now. 79% of high schoolers say it's easy to get marijuana. In a prohibition environment, that's the norm. Why do you think we ended alcohol prohibition? It was because it was a complete failure. You know, this whole issue of who has sovereignty over our bodies is a classic example of big government and why so many people have concerns with government. It's government trying to tell us what to do with our own bodies. And I guess the bottom line is, how can we continue to arrest people, to incarcerate people for using a product, for buying and selling a product that by every standard is less toxic and less addictive than alcohol or tobacco? That's the question you have to answer as you go into that voting booth. And that's why there's no option but to be supportive of ending this wasteful, harmful era of prohibition, and let's regulate it, let's control it like we do alcohol, and let's go for a little bit of a brighter future rather than the kind of life that this country's endured for the last 45 years.
Thank you. We'll take two more questions. Andrew and then Don. Oh.
One is, why the choice to put it, regulation, in the treasurer's office instead of public health or public safety? So those seem to be the two arguments that are buttressing the support. It seems like an odd place to put it with no particular expertise. Second question is there any assistance in the legislation for cities and towns to implement regulation? I mean, we may have discretion, but we have either no resources or lack technical capability to effectively do anything. So is there any help for us, or do we just get the responsibility?
So the question for the at-home audience is, why is the regulation in the treasurer's office, and what is going to be available in terms of assistance to cities and towns, municipalities?
The first, we put it under the treasurer's office because that's where the ABCC is now. The Alcoholic Beverages Control Commission is under the treasurer's office. We basically wanted to replicate that system. We didn't want to put it under DPH because DPH is administering the medical program. They frankly have not done a good job of it. You heard our opponent say the medical marijuana system, medical marijuana is available now. There are 7 dispensaries. We've heard from patients who can't access these dispensaries, 7 in the whole state. Only 155 doctors right now are allowed to prescribe marijuana in Massachusetts. It's just been a very slow, extremely slow rollout. So that's why we put it under the treasurer's office, because that's where the ABCC is now. We thought that'd be the proper place for it. As for assistance for communities, you have the ability to impose a 2% tax. You can use that tax however you want. It goes directly to the communities. We don't have, if you want to negotiate with a marijuana retail facility to see if there are additional payments they can make to the towns, we allow that.
But that's all after the fact money, when we've already cut the deal, that may not be.
Yes, it is. Yeah, yes, though we don't, we give, as I mentioned earlier, we do give the authority to determine where it can be located, all the other things that I said, lighting, security, hours, all that stuff. We don't automatically give the communities any money to do that with. We do that with a 2% optional tax that you can impose.
Thank you. Mr. O'Keefe.
Yes. As I understand this piece of legislation, which again is 25 pages long, and I commend you to torture yourself some evening and read it, the selectmen have virtually no power in any given town, whatever your town government is. If you want to change anything in this, it has to be by a referendum vote. So you'll be paying for the cost of that election if you don't like something that's in this bill. And with respect to what this gentleman said a few moments ago about this being an industry and this being about money, if you have a company that's charged with selling a product, you want to expand your market, don't you? Isn't that what it's all about? And so that's why we have, the traditional Pop-Tart over here, which you're all familiar with, and then the Pot-Tart, which is being sold in Colorado. The classic Klondike bar is now a Klondike bar infused with marijuana, and so on and so on and so on. And who do you think this stuff is marketed to? It's marketed to the next generation of people that they want to get hooked on this stuff so they can have a bigger customer base. It's not too different from what the cigarette industry did in World War II when they stuck a pack of Camels or Lucky's in the C rations of our soldiers, and told us that this is all harmless, and they lied about it for years and years and years until they were challenged in court, and the studies that even they had done were revealed to the public that this was a terribly hurtful thing to the public health. And so my point to you is, do we want to go down this road now, or do we want to wait and see a little more data from Colorado, where teen drug use is through the roof, the highest in the country, where accidents, fatalities, motor vehicle, all the rest, through the roof since let's look at some more data from these laboratories before we decide that this is a good idea for Massachusetts.
Thank you. Dawn?
I just have a question for the proponents of the bill. I know why District Attorney O'Keefe is here speaking in opposition. I know why Senator DiMacedo is here speaking in opposition. When you started saying, we put this in front of, my question is to you, sir, and I've known Mr. Elrick for a few years. He's been a contractor to the town of Bourne. I have the utmost respect for him. I guess my question is, what's in it for you? A guy from Duxbury doesn't just put a suit on and come down here and try to sell recreational marijuana. Are you a paid consultant, sir? Are you with a nonprofit? What's the...
So the question for the audience at home is just in terms of what are the, to identify the proponents of the bill.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I started as a reporter. I'm a communications professional. I was hired by the campaign to help them communicate their goals to the voters and help pass the initiative. If this passes, I get nothing. I have no stake in the marijuana industry. I have no intent of becoming a retailer of any kind. So if this passes, I don't get a bonus. I get nothing. I mean, I am being paid by the campaign to do what I've done with many other campaigns, to help them pass a particular initiative. And in this case, I happen to believe it personally.
Well, who's the campaign?
The campaign is the campaign, it started called the Campaign to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol. When we got our question number by the Secretary of State, we became the Yes on 4 campaign. So it's a formal committee that was registered, that we registered with the Office of Campaign Political Finance, and we're a campaign committee.
Nonprofit?
It's a political committee. Yeah, it's not a nonprofit. It's a political committee. Just like any other, just like the charter school committee, just like every other ballot question, they all have to form a committee. Yeah, that's registered so that you can get contributions from, folks. And by the way, everybody should know the contributions are being made public today. So you can see what our opponents, who's contributing to them, and you can see who's contributing to us. I think it'll be available at 5 o'clock.
Okay,
today.
we'll look for that, and we'll take our final question from Ed.
Yeah, for those of you who make the statement, you should understand that Beacon Hill has structured it so that the selectmen really have no power over anything that's important.
Well, I'll just take that as a comment, and then we'll
The question I have is that, when I'm very wary of statistics on both sides. I'm very wary of statistics, and I'm also very wary of anything that district attorneys and police are always in favor of or against. I'm always wary of that. And I wonder if, because I think back and I wonder how these people, all 4 of you would have, Senator and Absentia, would have stood some 75 years ago when this whole topic came up with regard to alcohol. And, that seems to have worked its way through the world. If I look at marijuana and I look at all of the things that you have the district attorney has spoken about, and I compare it to what my friend Ed McManus just whispered in my ear, and I would wonder how many more fatalities are caused by cell phone use that the police don't regulate because it's just impossible as against what will happen if marijuana is legalized. I just think that what you're when you're against this, what's happening is there's a lot of hand-wringing, and I think there's a lot of red herrings that are being thrown out there. And maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, I'd be
So the
happy to.
question to the DA is, if it's legalized, what do you think are really going to be the impacts, given things that people do that could be dangerous, like cell phone use during driving?
Well, first of all, I applaud anybody who doesn't trust, district attorneys and police and everything else, and
Trust their causes, not them individually.
you're a proponent of Will Rogers' famous line, "There are liars, damn liars, and then there are statistics." Okay? But all we can do is look at the data that's coming from the places that have already done this, and you see the teen drug use has increased, and you see that motor vehicle deaths have increased, and again, so that's just a reality, and that's why I say don't believe any one of us here today. Look up this stuff yourself; it's readily available. Do we want? In the end, the question seems to me to be, since nothing's happening to the 30-year-old engineer, as I mentioned earlier, who goes home at night and smokes a joint, and this issue that was suggested to you that if this passes, this thing will no longer be illegal, and whether this passes or not, this is still illegal. It's against the federal law, and it will remain against the federal law, and that's why it's a cash-on-the-barrel head business. That if you saw the Globe yesterday, you see ex-military are having to guard the grows and the buildings and everything else in Colorado because it's all cash. This is just, we need a conversation about drugs in this country. But this isn't the answer, to pass this thing, which favors an industry to come in and sell Klondike bars and Pop-Tarts and everything else to kids. That's what it's about, to grow their client base. I don't think that's a good public policy choice for the Commonwealth. Look at it and make your own decisions, whether you think it is.
Thank you. I'm going to take the very final question and give everyone an opportunity to wrap up. Sam?
Well, this is really a point of information. If you're interested in actually getting the medical industry's analysis of what causes addiction and what have you, there have been 2 articles in the New England Journal of Medicine, one in January, one in April, that really talk about the physiological changes and the neurological and psychological changes. It's a technical for addiction as a basis for looking at any of these kinds of issues.
So for the at-home audience, there's information in the New England Journal of Medicine within the last 6 months that you can check with respect to addiction. And I'm going to just go right ahead.
I must say, I'm amazed by all of the anti-industry, anti-corporatist individuals in this room today. I didn't know business was such a bad thing. One individual said, sort of, talk about the money, follow the money. One of the fascinating things on the drug war has been the growth of the criminal justice lobby, the industrial criminal justice lobby, if you will. And one of the most remarkable statistics about that is that in California, for example, and I'm sure it's true in this state, it used to be the teachers' union was the largest contributor to campaigns. It's now the prison guard union. We have developed a prison industry second to none in the world. We are the world's incarceration capital, and that is primarily due to the incarceration, the arrest and incarceration of non-violent drug felons, and both the national and the state level. That hasn't been good for the country, hasn't been good for black and brown people. There's civil asset forfeiture laws that allow assets allegedly associated with drug crimes to be forfeited to the local police departments and such. Those are motivations to keep the drug war going. So when you talk about the money, yes, there's money involved at every level, as there is with everything else that's American. That's just a fact of life. Question is, what's the best way to control it? What's the best way to limit the potential harms associated with it? Having a prohibition model where you have no control and you have 800,000 Massachusetts residents smoking and buying it from wherever they will. The DA talked about how he has no problem with that professional at the end of his day smoking his joint if that's what he wants to do to relax. Well, every time he has to purchase his marijuana, he's committing a crime. If somebody possesses more than 2 ounces or more than an ounce of marijuana, they're committing a crime, potentially making them guilty of a crime that can be incarcerated for thousands of dollars in fines. If you grow a couple of plants, you can go to jail. So to suggest that there's no problem, let's just keep the status quo in place, just doesn't correspond with reality. How anyone can think that the current status quo has been working, I just don't think that you're reading the newspapers or you're following things. I have been around a lot of young people. One of the things I heard was how cynical they became about this discussion of the drug war and this belief that they began to have from their own personal experience. When they hear their parents and they hear these so-called professionals compare marijuana with heroin and compare all of the drugs together, and then the kids know, oh, wait a minute, I've tried marijuana. It's not like heroin. It's not even as dangerous for me, from my own personal experience and theirs, as is alcohol. So when you create those kinds of dynamics, when you have children, teenagers, that see the cynicism and see the wrong-headedness of policies that are being espoused, it's no wonder that we haven't been very effective with our drug education. So I'll leave it with that.
Thank you very much. Next.
I want to finish
This is
again.
wrap up.
Yeah, wrap up. Thank you very much, everybody. Great questions, by the way. Thank you very much. I just want to point out one thing. Judge this on the facts, not on fear that we see from the district attorney. For instance, a stat that he just said about deaths going through the roof in Colorado, vehicle deaths, absolutely not true. Last year, there was a slight increase in deaths. The Colorado Department of Transportation, I'm talking vehicle deaths, attributed that to distracted driving, additional miles driven because of low gas prices and increased employment, and the failure to use motorcycle helmets. They didn't mention marijuana once in the whole report. Teen use in Colorado is flat. The CDC, by the way, just came out with a report on September 2nd that showed teen use across the country flat despite increased availability of legal marijuana through medical marijuana, through decriminalization. So again, thank you very much. I appreciate you all coming.
Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. First of all, in conclusion, let me thank you all for, you've been very attentive. You're obviously concerned about your vote on this issue, and that's a good thing. All we're saying is educate yourselves before you cast the ballot. And again, when the reference is made to the notion that, the poor 30-year-old engineer, if he's going to smoke his joint at the end of the day, has to buy it from somebody who's committing a crime because it's still illegal to sell it. Whether you pass this or not, it's still illegal. It's a federal crime, and it will remain a federal crime, irrespective of whether we pass this or not. And so give that some thought. With respect to this issue of people being imprisoned and all this, I want you to realize something, and these things, I urge you, look them up yourselves. Massachusetts is 48th in the nation in per capita incarceration. We incarcerate fewer people in Massachusetts than only 2 other states. Do you know what they are? Maine and Minnesota. And I was talking to the police commissioner of Boston a few months ago, trying to get him to come on the Medical Legal Commission. And it was in the middle of, that very snowy period that we had. I guess it was a couple of years ago now. And I said, how's everything going in town? And the police commissioner said to me, I love this weather. There's no crime. It's too cold. That's why Maine and Minnesota are the only places in the country that are better than us in terms of who we incarcerate and why. And when I leave here this morning, I go up to meet with the Pew Center and the Council on State Governments and Senator Brownsberger and several others to see how we can further reduce our rates of recidivism for all kinds of crimes here in Massachusetts. So Massachusetts is a model for incarceration and how it should be done. And I'll give you one more statistic that might surprise you. When all of this stuff arose a couple of years ago too, we've got to get rid of, these sentences that incarcerate these poor low-level drug people. The district attorneys drilled down by looking at the Board of Probation record of every single person who was in a state's prison in Massachusetts, and believe it or not, for a drug sentence. And believe it or not, there were only 1,487 people imprisoned in Massachusetts for a drug sentence. And as we looked at the probation records of those people, guess what we found? They represented, those 1,467 people, 58,000 arraignments. What does that tell you? That we're incarcerating those people who should be incarcerated. They've already had 40 bites at the apple apiece on average. And 78% of those people had a gun charge, a home invasion, or another violent crime along with their drug sentence. So don't buy into this idea that these poor, nonviolent drug people are languishing in prison. It just isn't true. They're violent criminals. They're violent criminals. The drugs are incidental and to their criminal careers. They would be committing another type of crime if there wasn't drugs to sell. So beware of that sophistry. And again, don't take my word for this stuff. This data is available. Look it up. And all I can ask you to do is make an informed judgment when you pull the ballot. Thank you very much for listening.
Appreciate it. Great. I want to thank our panelists for the debate. On behalf of the Cape and Island Selectmen and Councilors Association, we do have a very important announcement from Greg Mill, the Chair of the Board of Mosquito Control. Greg, I don't know if you want to come up here for the cable.
I think you can hear me.
It's for the TV, really. Yeah, thanks.
We've become more formal.
Right.
With the new era of TV. So just a quick announcement to communicate to the towns across the Cape. And in a few towns, we have had an unprecedented, historic high summer for West Nile virus. And so we would not be responsible as your 5-member Board of Commissioners of Cape Cod Mosquito Control, which, as you know, is a regional entity. It does have a unfortunate relationship with the state, where the state, as Ed Lewis notated, is trying to control us, and we have gotten bills passed that show that we are in control, and that struggle continues. But to get to the point of the West Nile virus, Falmouth in particular had this year a really high rate of West Nile detected mosquitoes. No human cases, but we had six mosquito pools samples that are tested by the Department of Public Health in Woods Hole in particular. Woods Hole had six pools positive and one in another part of Falmouth. And then also in Barnstable, we had one pool positive, and then we also had one pool positive in Yarmouth for Triple E. But Falmouth in particular is a problem. And overall, this has been an unprecedented high year for positive mosquitoes for West Nile. And so we have sent additional crews to Falmouth. We do thousands and thousands of catch basins across Cape Cod. We do a lot of work to get water moving. We're the only mosquito control project in the state that does not do adulticiding. We respect that this is a sole source aquifer. We do a much more labor-intensive approach to mosquito control, getting water moving. Other parts of the state, other mosquito control projects do adulticiding. They do spraying. We don't do that. We've also had the great benefit this year of using the county drone, which has helped us tremendously in places like the Sagamore Marsh, which is massive. But we want to make sure that we communicate to the entire Cape that the project, the crews that are out there are on the job. We have a very effective program, very lean and mean. Each of your towns are where the money comes from. We have always contended the money comes from the towns, not the state, and we still hold that to be true. What we are going to do now is reach out to Falmouth. Where's Sue? We're going to reach out to Falmouth, and Gabby Sokolsky, who's our entomologist, assistant superintendent, she and I are going to go to one of Falmouth Selectmen's meetings to try to inform the public. The other thing that mosquito control does a ton of is the public awareness for people not to have standing water, to make sure gutters are clean, to not have, bird baths and things like that, because that's the breeding ground for mosquito. So any standing water is critical. So we just want to make it known that we're on the job, and we're going to work with the towns. And you have 2 representatives out of the 5 on the board, actually 3 technically, 2 technically, 3 in reality. Myself representing this August body, and you also have a town manager representing the Town Managers Association, and that is now Rodney Collins, who replaced Charlie Sumner, who had been our town manager rep for 19 years. This is unique to our legislation, to the Cape, and we move forward. We just got a letter, last point, from the esteemed group of the State Reclamation Board. We wrote to the Department of Agriculture and to the Secretary Beaton, the head of Environmental Affairs, and we've made it known that we are not going to pay these fees for trucks. We're now being charged to have trucks looked at by this OVM agency, Office of Vehicle Management. We've protested this. It's about $8,000 a year. We brought it up to this group. This group was very kind and made a motion and passed a unanimous order to send a letter, and Ed McManus, as our esteemed clerk, sent the letter, but the letter we got back is just a bureaucratic bunch of baloney. And so we are now, an incidental piece, we are now working with the island of Nantucket, and we have not given up on our push to have a study to show that this regional service would be far better done on a regional basis without the umbilical cord to the state, and we're moving forward with that. And it was not our impetus, it was the impetus of the Special Commission on County Governance, you remember from a few years ago. They wanted this put as a service locally, maybe in relationship to the county or maybe independent, but we're going to separate from the state if all goes well.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Greg.
That's it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. We'll have you in Falmouth. Thanks
Yeah,
for the
thank you.
announcement. And just as a final note, I want to thank our speakers, Jim Borghesani, Richard Elrick, Senator DiMacedo, and Mike O'Keefe. Thanks very much. We're adjourned.